This is Land of Havilah, 2 Samuel 7. David brought the ark to Jerusalem in the last chapter and put it in a tent. This was right about 1000 BC. Now David's thinking about building a house for the ark, something more substantial than a tent. Verse 1. When the king lived in his house, and Yahweh had given him rest from all his enemies all around, the king said to Nathan the prophet, "See now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but God's ark dwells within curtains." Nathan said to the king, "Go, do all that is in your heart, for Yahweh is with you." Comment. In verse 1, Yahweh has given David rest from his enemies all around. There's no more civil war with the house of Saul, and since Yahweh has just routed the Philistines twice, they are subdued as well. Now that David has some time on his hands, he's embarrassed that he lives in a house of cedar while God's ark dwells within curtains, meaning in a tent, Exodus 26:1. In verse 3, we have the first mention of Nathan the prophet. David asked Nathan whether he should build a solid structure for the ark, and Nathan said, "Go do all that is in your heart, for Yahweh is with you." But coming up, Yahweh is going to answer Nathan in the night. He's going to start talking about a house not for him, but for David. The message will evolve into a prophetic glimpse at the eternal governance of the Promised Land. In the day of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh promised many times that their descendants would possess the land forever. Now Yahweh is going to promise David that one of his descendants will occupy the throne of the land forever. Now verse 4. That same night Yahweh's word came to Nathan, saying, "Go and tell my servant David, Yahweh says, should you build me a house for me to dwell in? For I have not lived in a house since the day that I brought the children of Israel up out of Egypt, even to this day, but have moved around in a tent and in a tabernacle. In all the places in which I have walked with all the children of Israel, did I say a word to any of the tribes of Israel, whom I commanded to be shepherd of my people Israel, saying, why have you not built me a house of cedar?" Comment. Yahweh's referring to some history. About 450 years ago, he made a covenant with Israel at Mount Sinai. He committed himself at that time to dwell with them. He fulfilled that promise by occupying the tabernacle. He committed to be their God and to prosper them wildly if they would be obedient, but to punish them extraordinarily if they wouldn't. Exodus 19:5-8, Exodus 25:8, and Leviticus chapter 26. Yahweh says to Nathan, "Tell David this, all the hundreds of years I've been dwelling with Israel, I've been content to dwell in a tent. I haven't asked anyone to build a house for me." But now coming up, Yahweh's still delivering his word to Nathan, but he switches focus on what David wants to do for him to what he's going to do for David. He's going to build David an enduring house. It's going to be a house not in the sense of a structure, but in the sense of a family dynasty that will last forever. Verse 8, "Now therefore tell my servant David this, Yahweh of armies says, I took you from the sheep pen, from following the sheep, to be prince over my people, over Israel. I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. I will make you a great name, like the name of the great ones who are in the earth." Comment. First off, Yahweh says, I took you from nothing to being king of Israel, and I cut off all your enemies, but I'm not done lifting you up. I'm going to make the name of David great, world famous. This is more foreshadowing of Christ. Christ was born into very humble circumstances, but God's in the process of cutting off all of Christ's enemies, and he's going to exalt the name of Christ forever. Now coming up, Yahweh says, this is what I'm going to do for your people Israel. Verse 10, "I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, that they may dwell in their own place and be moved no more. The children of wickedness will not afflict them any more as at the first, and as from the day that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel. I will cause you to rest from all your enemies." Comment. Israel's coming out of the period of the judges into the period of the kings. Every time Yahweh raised up a judge, he used that judge to deliver his people from foreign oppression, Judges 2:18. Yahweh says David will be the same. He'll use David to protect his people from oppression so that they dwell securely in the land without fear of attack. But here again there's double meaning because Yahweh's also speaking of the Christ. Yahweh will use the Christ to deliver his people from evil. As it says in verse 10, the children of wickedness will not afflict them. That will be fulfilled when we dwell as a family dynasty in the New Jerusalem described in Revelation chapter 21. Speaking of the protection that we'll enjoy there, quote, there will in no way enter into it anything profane or one who causes an abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life, end quote. So our eternal dwelling will be as Yahweh described in verses 10 and 11. The children of wickedness will not afflict us, and we will have rest from our enemies. Now Yahweh goes on. He's simultaneously going to be describing the dynasty that he'll build for David and the dynasty he'll build for David's descendants, first David's son Solomon, then Solomon's successors, then the Christ, still in verse 11. Moreover, Yahweh tells you that Yahweh will make you a house. Comment, Yahweh's going to make a house for David, that is, he's going to make a dynasty for David, verse 12. When your days are fulfilled and you sleep with your fathers, I will set up your offspring after you who will proceed out of your body, and I will establish his kingdom. Comment, Solomon and eventually the Christ will proceed out of David's body as David's physical descendants. Yahweh will establish a kingdom for both of them, but in the case of Christ, the kingdom will be far and beyond what David can even imagine. David is going to spend the rest of his life trying to put his finger on just how awesome that's going to be. Now Yahweh goes on, still speaking of those descendants, particularly Christ, verse 13. He will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Comment, Solomon will build a house for Yahweh's name, not David. It'll be known as the Temple of Solomon, but of course it's going to be Yahweh's temple and not actually Solomon's. But in duality, Christ will build a house for Yahweh's name, a house in the sense of a dynasty or kingdom. Christ will be on the throne of that kingdom forever. Verse 14. I will be his father, and he will be my son. If he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the stripes of the children of men. But my loving kindness will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away before you. Comment. Once again, Yahweh is speaking of this descendant of David in the singular. He's using singular nouns and pronouns to indicate one person. But again, it's going to be fulfilled in duality, in two persons, in two descendants of David, in Solomon and in Christ. Yahweh will be the father of Solomon and of Christ, and they will be his sons. The if part, if he commits iniquity, applies only to Solomon. The chastisement by the rod and stripes of men refers only to Christ, because though Solomon sinned, he wasn't beaten or chastised for it. But God promised the beating, so it had to come. And though Christ didn't sin, strangely, he was beaten and chastised by men, Matthew 27:26, to fulfill this prophecy and others. So one was the sinner and the other took the punishment for it. In fact, Christ took the punishment not just for Solomon, but for all sinners. The statement, my loving kindness will not depart from him, applies to both Solomon and Christ. To Solomon because Christ took the punishment for his sin, and to Christ because he didn't sin. So to fulfill these verses, it takes both Solomon and Christ, both of them descendants of David. Verse 16. Your house and your kingdom will be made sure forever before you. Your throne will be established forever. Comment. According to verse 13 and twice in verse 16, David's throne, dynasty, and kingdom will last forever. Hebrew ad olam, which has also been translated permanently, always, and unto the age. Of course, no descendant of David has been sitting on the throne of Israel for a long time, so this could only refer to Christ, who sits on it now and always will. Verse 17. Nathan spoke to David all these words and according to all this vision. Comment, that was the end of Yahweh's message in the night to Nathan for David. Nathan delivered the message, and now the last 12 verses of the chapter will be David's response to Yahweh. Already we can bet he won't be able to find adequate words. Verse 18. Then David the king went in and sat before Yahweh, and he said, Who am I, Lord Yahweh, and what is my house that you have brought me this far? This was yet a small thing in your eyes, Lord Yahweh, but you have spoken also of your servant's house for a great while to come, and this among men, Lord Yahweh. Comment, there are translation difficulties here according to the NET Bible translation notes, so we can't be sure what David was saying exactly. Maybe he's having difficulty understanding how Yahweh will accomplish a permanent dynasty among men. David would be right to wonder how an eternal kingdom could be possible with a succession of men sitting on the throne. Surely there would be a slip-up somewhere along the line. Surely someone would make a mistake that would be fatal to his kingdom. Surely at some point a king would fail to have offspring. Surely someone would anger the Lord so badly that Yahweh wouldn't be able to tolerate him anymore. But none of this will be a problem with Christ. David goes on, verse 20. What more can David say to you? For you know your servant, Lord Yahweh. For your word's sake and according to your own heart, you have worked all this greatness to make your servant know it. Therefore you are great, Yahweh God, for there is no one like you, neither is there any God besides you, according to all that we have heard with our ears. Comment. David says, you truly are the great God our ancestors described to us. He says, you have worked all this greatness, have worked being the operative phrase, showing completion. It's complete not because it's happened yet, but because if Yahweh said it would happen, it will happen. Verse 23. What one nation in the earth is like your people, even like Israel, whom God went to redeem to himself for a people and to make himself a name, and to do great things for you and awesome things for your land before your people, whom you redeemed to yourself out of Egypt, from the nations and their gods. You established for yourself your people Israel to be your people forever, and you, Yahweh, became their God. Comment. The permanent kingdom will be composed of Israelites. Jesus said that God could raise up sons of Abraham from stones, Matthew 3:9. In the New Covenant, God did do something similar to that. He made Israelites not from stones, but from Gentiles. He wiped out the distinction between Israelites and Gentiles so that anyone could be adopted into the kingdom, Romans 10:12. This was true even in Moses and David's time. Foreigners could be adopted into the family of Israel, Numbers 15:15. So the eternal kingdom of Israelites includes everyone who applies to Christ for adoption into the nation of God. David continues, verse 25. Now, Yahweh God, the word that you have spoken concerning your servant and concerning his house, confirm it forever and do as you have spoken. Let your name be magnified forever, saying, Yahweh of armies is God over Israel, and the house of your servant David will be established before you. For you, Yahweh of armies, the God of Israel, have revealed to your servant, saying, I will build you a house. Therefore your servant has found in his heart to pray this prayer to you. Now, O Lord Yahweh, you are God, and your words are truth, and you have promised this good thing to your servant. Now therefore let it please you to bless the house of your servant, that it may continue forever before you. For you, Lord Yahweh, have spoken it. Let the house of your servant be blessed forever with your blessing. Comment. David says he's totally on board with the plan. He says, Yahweh, you said you would bless my house, so go ahead and bless it. He says he's confident in praying it because Yahweh's the one who said it first. And we say, Yahweh, let your word be established. May your kingdom come. 2 Samuel 8 is next at landofhavilah.net, 2 Samuel 8.